Hello. My name is Serafina. At 2 a.m., my mother called me from a freezing highway, whispering, "Help! I was robbed! They left me." She meant my brother and his wife. They drove her 120 miles away, dumped her in a snowstorm, then filed paperwork to steal everything she had left. While I was in meetings about a $10 million deal, they were calling lawyers to declare her incompetent. So I walked away from my career. To walk her back into the courtroom she was never supposed to survive. But how do you prove your mother still matters when her own children treat her like she's already gone? And what would you do if your own family planned your mother's erasure while smiling at the camera? Would you fight? Or would you pretend you didn't hear her say, "They called me a burden"? The heater hummed quietly in the background, filling the corners of my Denver condo with warmth while my eyes locked onto the screen of my laptop. Numbers danced before me, funding milestones, projections, partnership clauses. My team was counting on me to close this deal. $10 million. 10 years of sweat, grit, and compromise had led to this moment. I'd muted my phone hours ago. Deadlines demanded focus, and frankly, I wasn't expecting anyone to call this late, especially not her. When the screen lit up, I barely glanced. Then I froze. "Mom." I stared at the name for half a second too long. A sharp chill cut through the warmth of the room as I reached for the phone, my chest tightening. "Hello?" All I could hear was heavy breathing. Then a voice, shaky, small, and soaked in panic. "Sarah, help! They left me. Highway. It's cold. I'm hurt." "What? Where are you? Who left you?" She choked out words in fragments, trying to speak through sobs and wind. "Arthur! Vera! Said I was a burden. They dropped me off. Livingston. Gas station." My heart slammed against my ribs. Livingston, Montana. That was over 600 miles away. "I'm calling 911, I said, already on my feet, keys in hand, phone between my ear and shoulder. "Don't move. Stay inside the station. I'm coming. Right now." My coat was still damp from the snow earlier that day. Denver had been cold, but nothing like what I imagined she was standing in. For a second, I paused. My laptop still glowed on the table. That deal. The one I had lived for, bled for. Gone if I walked away tonight. I grabbed my purse and slammed the door behind me. I wasn't sure what I was walking into. But if my mother was standing alone at a highway gas station in a snowstorm without a coat or phone, then something had gone terribly wrong. The drive through the dark Montana roads felt eternal. My wipers thumped steadily against the windshield, pushing away fat flakes of snow. Each mile I drove, another piece of my calm unraveled. I thought of Arthur and Vera, how they always claimed to be the responsible ones. They lived near Mom, checked on her, paid her bills, controlled everything from grocery orders to church donation envelopes. And me? I was the quiet one. The daughter who lived too far, worked too much, didn't know what was really going on. But in that moment, none of their control mattered. None of it. I just wanted her safe. Around 4:40 a.m., I rolled into the icy lot of a Sinclair station tucked off Highway 90. One flickering overhead light buzzed above the pumps. The snow was thick, untouched except for a set of shallow footprints near the wall. Then I saw her, hunched in the corner, leaning against the cold brick. My mother sat wrapped in a thin coat she never wore in winter. Her face was pale, lips slightly blue. Her hands clutched a plastic grocery bag, her only possession in sight. I jumped out of the car and rushed over. "Mom?" She looked up slowly. Her eyes were glassy, confused, broken. "I didn't think you'd come," she whispered. "Don't say that," I said, wrapping my arms around her trembling shoulders. She winced. That's when I noticed the dried blood on her temple. "What happened to your head?" "I don't know. I fell, maybe. I think Vera pushed the door too hard." Inside the station, a young man behind the counter looked up as I helped her through the door. "She's been here almost 2 hours," he said. "Didn't have a phone. Used mine to call you. Wouldn't say much." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. After getting her into the car, I blasted the heater. I took her hand. It felt like ice. She barely said a word on the drive back to the nearest motel. We checked in under my name. The clerk didn't ask questions. He must have seen the storm of worry on my face. Once inside the room, she curled up on the bed, shaking under 3 layers of blankets. I sat in the chair across from her. The silence between us buzzed with what neither of us wanted to say. Finally, she whispered, "They said I was getting forgetful, that I was slowing them down." My stomach turned. They said it was just a drive to clear things up. Then Vera said I should get a coffee at the station. And when I came out, the car was gone. I clenched my fists. They left you, in a snowstorm, with no phone. I thought maybe they'd come back. She didn't finish that sentence. I stood and walked to the window. Snow continued falling, blanketing the parking lot in cold silence. That silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt like betrayal. When I turned back, my mother was already asleep. Or maybe just exhausted, emotionally and physically. I didn't blame her. I sat by her side, watching the rise and fall of her chest. How had it come to this? Arthur? Vera? If they truly thought they'd get away with this, they didn't know me at all. Because tonight, I wasn't the quiet one anymore. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes just drifted to the passenger side window, watching the pale dawn creep along the edges of the clouds. I could see her mouth twitch slightly, like she was chewing on a truth too painful to spit out. "They didn't say it like that," she finally murmured. Not out loud. I kept one hand on the wheel, the other wrapped loosely around the hot travel mug I'd picked up at a gas station outside of Billings. Neither of us had slept. We didn't talk for the rest of the drive. By the time we made it back to my place in Denver, the sun was high, but the world still felt frozen. I helped her into the house, her steps unsteady, and got her settled on the couch under a thick throw blanket. She kept glancing around, like the space was unfamiliar. My home was modern, quiet, with cool wood tones and clean lines, definitely not what she was used to. Still, it was safe. It was warm. That should have been enough. "Why would they do this?" she asked, not looking at me. That question had been rattling around in my skull for hours. I didn't have an answer, not one I was ready to say out loud. Later that afternoon, I drove her to see Dr. Callahan, my personal physician, and someone I trusted completely. We didn't talk much in the car. She stared out the window, fingers picking at a loose thread in her sweater. The exam room smelled like antiseptic and eucalyptus. Gloria sat on the table while Dr. Callahan examined the bruises along her wrists and a light swelling above her left eyebrow. "It's not uncommon," he said gently. "Trauma-induced confusion. A mild concussion, maybe some emotional disassociation. Physically, she'll recover, but emotionally, that depends." He didn't ask how it happened. He saw enough in my expression to understand that the story wasn't simple. Back at home, I helped her take a warm shower and change into something more comfortable. While she rested, I unpacked the small overnight bag she'd clutched the entire time. Among a few toiletries and a half-eaten protein bar, I found her old leather Bible. The corners were worn, the spine held together with clear tape. I'd seen her carry it to church every Sunday for as long as I could remember. I placed it on the nightstand in the guest room, then went to the kitchen to make tea. "Can you hand me my Bible?" she called out softly. I brought it to her. She smiled weakly and opened it across her lap. A folded piece of paper fluttered out and landed on the bedspread. She reached for it slowly, then hesitated. "What's that?" I asked. "I forgot that was in there," she said, voice barely above a whisper. I picked it up. The handwriting was hers, delicate, neat, a little shaky. It was dated 3 weeks ago. "If anything happens to me," it read, "I want Serafina to have the house. Arthur is too angry. He won't understand." "But she will." I stared at the words, heat rising in my chest. Angry wasn't strong enough for what I felt. I handed it back to her. "Why didn't you tell me you wrote this?" "I didn't want to make a big deal of it," she said. I felt safer knowing it was there." She was trembling again. I sat beside her, not speaking. A few hours later, I decided to dig through her purse. I wasn't being nosy. I needed to know what we were dealing with. She was still napping when I found the envelope buried at the bottom. It looked like a regular insurance document at first, but the words "durable power of attorney" leapt off the page. Signed, notarized, stamped with the name of Arthur's law firm. I sank into a chair at the dining table, the paper trembling in my hands. I read it 3 times to be sure. It gave Arthur full control. Medical decisions, financial accounts, property, everything. My hands clenched into fists. I dialed Devin, a lawyer friend from Boulder, and read him the language line by line. "This doesn't sound like she understood what she was signing," he said immediately. "The way that's written, that's legal coercion, especially if she was under any sort of emotional stress or confusion." I thanked him, hung up, and sat there in the dim kitchen, staring at the tile backsplash. They didn't just drop her off on a highway. They tried to make her disappear, legally and financially, as if she were already gone. That night, I brought her a cup of chamomile tea and sat on the edge of her bed. "Mom," I began, "do you remember signing this?" I showed her the document. She squinted at it, pulled the blanket closer around her. "Arthur brought it over a while ago, said it was just for emergencies, something about health insurance. I didn't read it. I trusted him." I nodded slowly. "You said you didn't want us to fight over money," I said gently. She sighed. "I just didn't want anyone to feel cheated, that's all." "They didn't just fight," I said. "They planned this. And you were the target." She didn't respond. She stared at the ceiling like it held answers only she could read. "I didn't know they'd fight me," she whispered. I took her hand. It felt stronger now. Warmer. "They started this war," I said quietly. "And they don't know who they're up against." I turned off the light, but I didn't leave the room. I stayed there in the dark, listening to her breathe, not just to comfort her, but to remind myself she was still here, still fighting. And I'd make damn sure she got the chance to win. The air inside my house was still, the kind of quiet that only exists after a storm. I'd stayed up most of the night, checking on my mother every few hours, listening for anything out of place. She hadn't stirred, just the slow, rhythmic sound of her breath against the pillow. By the time sunlight filtered in through the blinds, a soft orange glow casting itself across the wood floors, I finally got up. I moved carefully, letting her sleep, and started making breakfast. Eggs, toast, a little fruit, and coffee, black the way she used to take it before Arthur insisted she switch to decaf. When she shuffled into the kitchen an hour later, wrapped in one of my old flannel robes, she looked like she'd aged 5 years overnight. She glanced around like she was in someone else's home. Did we drive here?" she asked, voice low, uncertain. "No, I did," I said gently, setting a cup of coffee in front of her. "You don't remember getting here?" She blinked slowly, staring into the mug. "I remember snow, lights. Then I woke up here." I watched her lift the cup to her lips, and that's when I noticed it. Her left hand. Bare. I hadn't seen her without that ring, her wedding band, since I was a child. It had grooves and scratches from decades of wear, but she wore it like armor. Now it was gone. "Where's your ring?" I asked. She looked down at her fingers, puzzled, almost as if she hadn't realized it herself. "Oh," she said, frowning. "Vera said it looked dated, offered to get it cleaned. I gave it to her weeks ago." My stomach twisted. "And she never gave it back?" "No," she said slowly. "Maybe she forgot. Or maybe she didn't." I turned away and started rinsing dishes, not trusting my face to hide what I was thinking. They weren't just erasing her authority, they were scrubbing away her identity, piece by piece. We spent most of the morning quietly. I didn't press her for anything. But something about that missing ring, it had unlocked something. She stared out the window for a long time, her eyes locked on the backyard where the snow still clung to the fences and tree limbs. "They said I was being dramatic," she said suddenly. I looked up from my laptop. "Who?" She didn't blink. "Vera, when I cried." I sat back. "Cried when?" "When she pushed me." My chest tightened. "She didn't shove me hard, but it was firm, enough that I lost my balance," she continued. "Arthur just stood there, said I needed to calm down, stop causing problems." Her voice had dropped to a near whisper. "Then she told him I was overreacting and that maybe I needed a break. Like a timeout for a child. She smiled bitterly. A 76-year-old child. I didn't interrupt her. I just let the words come, because they needed to. We were supposed to be going to lunch, she said, gaze far away now. They picked me up, said they wanted to talk, but when I asked where we were headed, they just said, "You'll see." My grip tightened around my coffee mug. They pulled up to the gas station, told me to go inside and grab something warm to drink. I thought it was strange, but I didn't want to cause more tension. She paused. When I came back out, the car was gone. Her voice cracked on the last word. "I waited," she whispered. "I waited over an hour." A clerk finally offered his phone. "They said they'd be right back?" I asked. She nodded. But I knew they wouldn't be. The next few minutes passed in silence. She picked at her toast, not eating much, and eventually returned to the guest room for a nap. I cleaned the kitchen mechanically, my mind a storm of memory and anger. That afternoon, I checked on her again. She was resting, curled into herself, her face relaxed in sleep, but her fists were clenched. I walked back to my office and sat down at my desk. Then I opened my laptop and started writing, not emails, documentation. I listed everything I'd seen, every bruise, every detail, every document. I scanned the note from her Bible, photographed the power of attorney form, noted the missing ring, her vague recollections, and now, this admission of being left behind intentionally. And I wrote one more thing. She remembers being pushed. I paused, then added, she knew they wouldn't come back. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting deep shadows across my living room floor, I closed the laptop. The glow from the screen lingered for a moment before fading to black. "They forgot who I am," I said aloud, though no one was there. My voice was steady. I may be the quiet one, but I was never the weak one. I stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the snow-covered yard. If they thought they'd gotten away with it, if they thought I'd sit back and let it happen just because I lived in another zip code, they were about to learn that being distant doesn't mean being blind, and being silent doesn't mean surrender. By the time I ended the call with Arthur, my jaw was so tight I had to consciously relax it. I stared at the phone in my hand for a long beat before locking the screen and setting it face down on the kitchen counter. The next step was clear. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was moving with intention. That morning, I drove across town to meet Devlin Rhodes, a no-nonsense elder law attorney I'd crossed paths with a few times through community health panels and a nonprofit board. He was the kind of man who didn't waste words and didn't ask questions he already knew the answers to. His office sat on the third floor of a quiet commercial building in Lakewood. A receptionist offered me coffee, which I declined, and within minutes, I was seated across from Devlin in a book-lined room that smelled faintly of pine wood and litigation. He read through the power of attorney form I had scanned and printed. His face stayed neutral the entire time, but I noticed how his fingers drummed ever so slightly on the edge of his desk. "This wording's slippery," he said after a long pause. "Looks like Arthur had this drafted with enough ambiguity to suggest your mother consented freely. But these clauses?" He tapped a finger on one paragraph. "They scream coercion. She didn't even know what she was signing. She thought it was for insurance." He nodded slowly. "I've seen this tactic before. Paper trail that looks clean until you look closer. But it's not just the document." He opened a drawer and pulled out a printed filing. "This was submitted to the local court in Bozeman 2 days ago. Your brother has formally filed for temporary guardianship. Claims your mother is showing signs of cognitive decline and can no longer make informed decisions." My breath stalled. Even knowing it was coming didn't make it any easier to swallow. "So this is real," I said. "It's not just real, Serafina. It's active." I didn't flinch. I just leaned back in the chair and let the anger settle like sediment in my gut. "Can we stop it?" I asked. "We can contest it, but you'll need proof, more than just her word, videos, documents, witness statements if possible, and we'll need them fast." I nodded. "I've started compiling." "That's good," he said, "but you need to be prepared for this to get ugly. Fast." "Ugly," I said, "is what got us here." By the time I returned home, it was nearly sunset. The air outside had turned bitter, and the roads were beginning to glaze over with a slick layer of evening frost. Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. I found Mom in the living room, staring at the TV with the volume turned off. An old black and white movie flickered on screen, forgotten. She looked small in the chair, her shoulders hunched in a way that had nothing to do with posture. I sat down next to her. "Mom, we need to talk." She didn't look at me, but she gave a small nod. "Arthur filed for guardianship. He wants legal control over your medical and financial decisions." Her hands twitched slightly. Then, slowly, she turned to me. "They want to lock me up," she said. "Treat me like I've already died." I reached over, took her hand gently. "No one is locking you anywhere. Not while I'm still breathing." She didn't cry. She didn't have to. The shame in her eyes said more than any tears could. Later that night, as I helped her sort through her old suitcase for more clothes, I noticed something stiff wedged deep behind the inner lining. At first, I thought it was just cardboard reinforcement, but when I tugged gently, a torn envelope slid free, yellowed around the edges, creased, and half ripped. The handwriting on it was unmistakably hers. I unfolded the paper carefully. It had clearly been torn apart and then hastily taped back together. A few lines had smudges where moisture, tears maybe, had blurred the ink. "If anything ever happens," it began, "I want Serafina to have what's left. She never asked for anything, only gave." It was dated 3 months ago. In a corner of the envelope, in thick, aggressive strokes, were 3 words scrawled in a different hand. "Do not mail." I didn't need to be a handwriting analyst to recognize Arthur's script. I stared at the words until they blurred. Then I stood and walked straight to my office, sat at my desk, and picked up the phone. When he answered, I didn't give him the chance to play dumb. "I found the letter," I said. There was silence on the other end. "I also know about the guardianship filing." Another pause, then a sigh. "This isn't personal, Serafina," he said. "You're letting emotions cloud your judgment. Just let the lawyers handle it. It's bigger than you realize." "You know what's big?" I said, my voice calm but loaded. "Betraying your own mother? Stealing from her while smiling in her face. That's big, Arthur." He chuckled softly, like I was being naive. That sound, it was smug, the same laugh he used when he told me I overthought everything as a kid. "Look," he said, "I don't expect you to understand. You've been gone a long time. You don't see what's been happening. We've had to deal with her every day." "You mean deal with her like a chore? Like a dying houseplant?" I snapped. "I mean, she's not well, Sarah," he said, suddenly defensive. "She forgets things. She repeats herself. It's getting worse." "So you decided to dump her at a gas station?" His voice dropped an octave. "You don't know what it's been like." "I don't care what it's been like. What I care about is that she trusted you, and you treated her like trash." He exhaled through his nose. "I'm giving you 48 hours, I said. Withdraw the guardianship petition, publicly, or I go forward, with everything I have. You wouldn't dare." "Oh, Arthur," I said, a smile curling at the edge of my mouth. "You clearly don't remember who you're threatening." I hung up. Then I sat back in the chair, heart pounding, and looked at the family photo that still sat on the shelf above my desk. One taken years ago at Christmas. We were all smiling, arms wrapped around each other. How easily people lie through their teeth with a camera pointed at them. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. The war had started, not with weapons, not with fists, but with signatures, deception, and betrayal dressed in family ties. And I wasn't going to lose. I'd barely hung up with Arthur before I felt it, this shift in the air, not just anger, but a growing certainty. For the first time in a long time, I knew exactly what I needed to do, and it didn't involve being polite. But even with that resolve, I wasn't ready for the text that came in the next morning. "Hey," it read, "are you seeing what your sister-in-law is doing?" The message came from a woman I hadn't spoken to in years, a former neighbor of Mom's. She attached a link. My stomach dropped the second I saw the title of the Facebook event. "Honoring Our Legacy," hosted by Vera Callan. I stared at it for a moment, wondering if this was some joke, but there it was. The date was today. The venue? My mother's house. I clicked into the event page and scanned the description. It was full of flowery language about continuing traditions of grace and celebrating matriarchal leadership, words Vera probably copied from some Pinterest board. Gloria's name was mentioned 3 times, all in past tense. There were photos too, recent ones. The living room had been stripped of every trace of my mother. The walls had been repainted in cold gray tones. Her floral curtains were gone, replaced with stiff modern blinds. Even the antique sideboard, something my parents bought on their honeymoon, was absent. Then came the live stream. Someone had already started recording. I pressed play. Vera stood in front of a crowd in a navy blue dress, clutching a champagne glass with the kind of forced elegance that made my teeth hurt. "We're so grateful for all of you," she began, smiling like the queen of the county. "And as we carry forward the vision of Mom Fielden's generosity, we know she'd be proud of the work we continue in her name." I looked past her into the room, full of people I recognized, women from the church, a few folks from the hospital board, even the mayor's wife. Not one picture of my mother on the wall, not one piece of her in that room, just Vera basking in applause she hadn't earned. My hands shook as I closed the video. The next morning, I packed an overnight bag and drove back to Bozeman. The trip took the better part of a day, but I didn't stop except to refill the tank and grab a bad cup of diner coffee. It gave me just enough fuel to get through the ache that had settled deep in my chest. By the time I reached Mom's street, the sun had dipped low and the lights in the house were still on. I pulled into the driveway like I belonged there, which, legally, I still did, and stepped out into the cold. A neighbor across the street was collecting mail. She squinted, then smiled when she saw me. "Serafina? We thought your mother was in assisted care," she said, genuinely puzzled. I kept my voice even. "She's staying with me. She's recovering. From them." The woman's face fell. "Oh, well, it was such a nice event Vera threw, but I did wonder why Gloria wasn't mentioned more." I nodded once, then turned and headed to the front door. I didn't knock. Inside, the house smelled of catering trays and cinnamon candles. Everything felt off, too curated, too sanitized. It didn't feel like home, it felt like a set. I didn't stay long, just enough to walk through each room and confirm what I'd already seen online. Her things were gone, her presence wiped clean. Back in Denver the next morning, I poured myself a second cup of coffee and opened the newspaper. Front page of the Bozeman Gazette. Family legacy in trusted hands. Attorney's son steps up as caregiver. Arthur's photo was front and center. He wore that same self-satisfied grin he used during every family gathering where he managed to turn a potluck into a debate. "She's been struggling with confusion for a while," he was quoted. "We just want what's best for her. Sometimes that means making tough decisions." Tough decisions? You mean like dumping your mother at a gas station and then lying about it? I read the article 3 times. My name wasn't in it. Neither was the part where she was now living with me. No mention of her bruises, no quotes from her actual doctors, just a neat little narrative about a dutiful son stepping up during a crisis. I found Mom sitting in the sunroom when I walked in, wrapped in a blanket with her glasses perched low on her nose. She looked up when she saw the paper in my hand. "I already read it," she said. I waited. "So that's how it ends," she whispered. "I'm gone and no one even asks me." I sat down beside her. She didn't cry. She didn't have to. The weight of it all was in her eyes. I didn't say anything right away. I let the silence speak for me. Then I stood, walked into my office, and shut the door behind me. If they wanted a war of image, of reputation, I'd fight it on my terms. I picked up my phone and called Vera. She answered like she always did, with that syrupy voice she reserved for when she knew she was about to lie. "Serafina, I was just thinking about you. I hope you saw the coverage from the event. It turned out beautifully." "I did," I said flatly. "Interesting that Mom didn't know she was being honored." There was a pause. "Well, we thought it might be too emotional for her in her current state. You know how easily she gets confused." "She's not confused, Vera. She's angry," and she's hurt. Vera laughed softly. She's always been sensitive. I clenched the edge of my desk. This ends now. You had your little party, now prepare for mine. I didn't wait for a reply. I hung up. Then I opened my laptop and typed a statement. Nothing dramatic, just the truth. In plain words. To anyone using my mother's name, story, or image without her written consent, there are legal consequences for elder exploitation, and I won't hesitate to pursue them. You know who you are. I hit post and watched the words go live. I didn't expect applause. I didn't need it. But I wanted them to know I wasn't hiding. The world might have forgotten who Gloria Fielden was, but I hadn't. And as long as I had a voice, they wouldn't bury her name beneath lies. The moment I closed my laptop, something shifted in me. The ache that had been lingering behind my ribs for days hardened into something else, conviction. I'd spent too much time trying to be the reasonable one, the steady voice in a family full of noise. But reason hadn't saved my mother from being thrown away like she didn't matter. It hadn't protected her name, and it sure as hell hadn't stopped Arthur and Vera from turning our family home into a showroom for their ambition. I wasn't going to wait for them to move again. The next morning, I logged into the company's secure portal, opened the confidential deal memo for our $10 million Series B round, and started typing. This is to formally inform the board and our legal counsel that I, Serafina Kane, will be withdrawing from negotiations effective immediately. I hit send. It was a one-sentence email, but it closed a chapter I had spent a decade building. A decade of fundraising, investor pitches, sleepless nights, growth charts, and exit strategies, gone in 30 seconds. My phone lit up within minutes with board members asking what was happening. I ignored every call, because this wasn't about business anymore. This was about family, about my mother, about dignity. I walked back into the kitchen where Mom was sitting, watching the steam rise from her tea. She still hadn't said much since reading the article in the Bozeman Gazette, and I didn't push. The damage wasn't just on the surface. It ran deep, into places I couldn't reach with reassurances. That afternoon, I drove her to a neurologist in Boulder. Dr. Amanda Fields was calm, kind, and efficient. She performed a full assessment while I sat in the corner, pretending to scroll my phone but memorizing every detail. After the tests, we sat in her office. Mom sipped water from a paper cup while I waited for the verdict like it was a sentencing hearing. Dr. Fields didn't mince words. She's holding on, she said, but barely. Her short-term memory is affected, likely stress-induced. If this continues, another legal challenge, another public blow, it could accelerate into something we can't reverse. I nodded slowly. So if we want her to come back, to stay herself, you need to reduce her stress, Dr. Fields said, immediately. I thanked her and helped Mom into the car. As I pulled out of the lot, my hands trembled on the steering wheel. They weren't just erasing her name. They were trying to bury her memory while she was still alive. That night, after putting her to bed, I stayed up sorting through the legal folders I'd brought from Bozeman. Old estate papers, joint account statements, safety deposit box keys, scribbled notes Dad had left in margins of trust documents. And that's when I saw it. A copy of the original family trust, updated the year before Dad died. It included mention of a secondary property, a cabin in Vermont, left to Gloria in full, tucked away, never refinanced, never revalued, just left alone. I pulled the document closer. No mention of it had appeared in Arthur's filings. It wasn't listed in the preliminary guardianship asset report, which meant he didn't know it existed. And if Gloria still held full ownership of that cabin, still had something he couldn't touch, it was leverage. A new plan began forming. The next morning, I called Devlin. I may have a wild card, I said. I'm listening. There's a property in Vermont, still in Mom's name. It's untouched. If we can establish she still has active ownership and make that public, it undercuts his argument that she's no longer fit to manage her affairs, he finished. Exactly. Good, Devlin said. Let's use it, and fast. The hearing date's coming up. I drove out to the post office to overnight request a copy of the title deed, then contacted the county assessor's office in Vermont to request a valuation. The woman on the phone remembered the Fielden cabin. Oh, that place. It's still in good shape. Folks think it's abandoned, but the taxes are always paid on time. Thanks, I said, making a mental note to find out who had been paying them. By the time I got back home, the sun had already dipped low. I parked, took a breath, and stepped inside. The smell of garlic and rosemary greeted me from the kitchen. I found Mom at the stove, stirring a pot of chicken and rice. I remember how to make it, she said with a small smile. I stood there, watching her. Just the sight of her in my kitchen, in her element, even if her hand trembled slightly as she stirred, filled my chest with something that felt like hope. I didn't say anything. I just helped set the table. We ate quietly. No speeches, no tears, just food, warmth, and the unspoken relief of something familiar. Halfway through dinner, she looked up and said, "You always made it better than I did." I smiled. "I'm just trying to make things right." That night, I printed every document I'd gathered and placed them in a black folder on my desk. Then I wrote one sentence on the cover. She is still here, not just physically, but legally, emotionally, historically. She mattered, and I'd fight anyone who tried to write her out of her own story. The morning after I posted the legal notice online, I got in my car before the sun even crept over the rooftops. I drove east toward the stretch of highway where my mother had been abandoned. The sky was a flat slate gray, the kind that swallowed time and made you question whether it was too early or too late. I hadn't told Gloria where I was going. She didn't need another worry added to the list. I left a note on the counter with her breakfast and called my neighbor to check in on her mid-morning. She'd be fine, at least for a few hours. The gas station stood like an island in the middle of nowhere, low-roofed, wind-battered, and covered in patches of snow. I stepped inside, and the same young man who had helped my mother days ago stood behind the counter. He looked up and recognized me instantly. "She doing okay?" he asked. "She's safe now," I replied. "But I need your help." He hesitated, eyeing the security camera above the register. "I'm not supposed to give out footage." "I understand," I said, calmly. "But what happened to her wasn't just cruel, it was criminal. If I can't get that footage, the people who did this to her might get away with it." He glanced at the back office, lowered his voice. "There's a manager, but he's not in today." I pulled a business card from my coat. "This is my attorney. If anyone has a problem, have them call him. He'll make it very clear why this footage needs to be preserved and how not handing it over could look in court." The clerk nodded slowly. "Give me a sec." 15 minutes later, I walked out with a USB stick in my pocket and a tight knot in my chest. I didn't wait. I drove to the nearest cafe with decent Wi-Fi, ordered a coffee I didn't plan on drinking, and plugged the drive into my laptop. The timestamp read 3:58 a.m. The angle was slightly off-center, the camera mounted above the gas station entrance. There was no sound, just grainy black and white footage. Arthur's SUV pulled into frame. Vera stepped out of the passenger seat. She walked around to the back, opened the rear door, and said something to my mother, who moved slowly, hesitantly. I could see her body language clearly, confused, unsure, trying to please. Then Vera turned slightly. It was subtle, so subtle I might have missed it if I hadn't known what to look for. She didn't push hard, but she pushed, just enough. My mother stumbled forward. Vera gestured toward the entrance, turned on her heel, and got back in the SUV. The car reversed and pulled away. I closed my laptop. My hands were cold despite the heating vent blasting at my feet. There it was, the truth. They could lie in court. They could rewrite the narrative in the papers. But this was undeniable. When I got back home, Gloria was napping in the living room recliner, a knit blanket up to her chin. I didn't wake her. I needed air. I stepped out onto the porch and dialed Devlin. "We have footage," I said, "clear as day. I'll send a courier. We'll make certified copies," he said. "Anything else?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with another incoming call. I glanced at the screen. Mavis. I hadn't spoken to her in months. I picked up. "Hey, I heard what's happening," she said without preamble. "And I've got something you should hear." "What do you mean?" "Vera came to me last year, asking legal advice about elder guardianship. wanted to know how fast she could get it done without triggering pushback. I brushed her off, told her I didn't deal with that anymore, but she left a voicemail a few days later, thinking I was still practicing. My spine straightened. Do you still have it? I do. You free tonight? She lived 2 towns over. I made the drive after dinner, once Gloria was settled in bed and asleep. Mavis greeted me with a warm hug and a cup of ginger tea. We sat in her living room, surrounded by shelves of old law books and antique clocks that ticked in gentle unison. She handed me her phone and played the message. Vera's voice came through, bright and efficient as ever. If we get her declared incompetent, she said, the house goes straight to Arthur. She's slipping anyway. I don't want to wait until she forgets who we are. We need to act now. My stomach twisted. The calmness in her voice was what chilled me the most. It wasn't angry. It was calculated. I gave Mavis a look that said everything. I figured you'd want it, she said. You're the only one in that family who ever showed up for your mom. I drove home in silence, the recording burning a hole in my pocket. Once there, I sat at my desk and started assembling everything. The forged POA, the security footage, the voicemail, screenshots of the Facebook event, the article from the Gazette. My hands moved automatically, printing, labeling, stacking into organized folders. By the time I looked up, the sky was pitch black outside. I called Devlin. We have enough, I said. He didn't hesitate. Let's file the motion. The next morning, Gloria and I sat at the dining table. She was more alert today, her eyes clearer than they'd been in weeks. There's something I want you to sign, I said gently. Only if you're ready. She looked down at the paper, her own declaration, notarized, stating that she revoked all previous powers of attorney and appointed me as her legal representative moving forward. She didn't ask questions. She signed her name with a steady hand. After she set the pen down, she reached across the table and took my hand. Thank you, she whispered. I didn't reply. I just squeezed her fingers in return. 2 hours later, Devlin filed the protective injunction and official complaint for elder exploitation. By lunch, Arthur's legal team had already called twice. I didn't answer, because for once, I wasn't playing defense. I wasn't just protecting her. I was putting the truth into motion. And truth, as I'd learned, is a powerful thing once it starts moving. We drove into Bozeman before sunrise, the kind of early where the sky was more suggestion than light. There were maybe a dozen cars already parked outside the courthouse, most of them dusty, local, nothing flashy. But as we pulled in, I spotted one black SUV I recognized instantly, Arthur's. I parked at the far end of the lot. The courthouse steps loomed ahead like the start of a marathon. Beside me, Gloria sat straight, chin up. She wore the navy wool coat my father had given her the Christmas before he died. She'd pressed it herself that morning, smoothing the lapels like it meant something. You ready? I asked. She gave a small nod. Let's remind them who I am. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with quiet chatter. Reporters took their places. Local press, mostly. The Gazette, a few independent bloggers, maybe a news affiliate. The bailiff called for silence as we stepped in, and people actually turned to look. They didn't expect her to walk in on her own. Arthur sat with his attorney, tapping his pen against a legal pad. Vera was beside him, perfectly composed, not a hair out of place. She wore a beige cashmere wrap and that forced smile she used when someone asked about her skincare routine. It didn't fool me. Gloria and I took our seats behind our attorney Devlin. He nodded once, no frills, then stood. Your Honor, he began, we're here today not because of Gloria Fielden's inability to manage her affairs, but because others have attempted to take that ability away from her without cause or consent. He paced slowly, letting the words settle. There is a documented pattern of manipulation, emotional coercion, and legal exploitation, all designed to seize control of Ms. Fielden's estate under the pretense of care. We will show today that not only is Ms. Fielden competent, but that those who claim to act on her behalf have violated her rights and endangered her well-being. He nodded toward the screen being wheeled into place. The clerk dimmed the lights. The video began. Arthur's SUV pulls into frame. Vera steps out, opens the back door, speaks to Gloria, who hesitates, visibly confused. Then, the nudge, gentle, but purposeful. Enough to push her forward, enough to send a message. And then, Vera gets back in the car. They drive off. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Next came the audio, Mavis's voicemail, played through speakers. If we get her declared incompetent, the house goes straight to Arthur. Devlin passed printed transcripts to the judge and opposing counsel. Then I handed him the letter, my mother's handwritten note, found torn and hidden in her suitcase. Dated, signed, clear intent. The judge leaned forward slightly. Devlin continued, layering in medical reports from Dr. Fields, photos of the bruises, and the timeline of events leading up to Gloria's abandonment. They threw her away, Your Honor, he said, not raising his voice. And when that wasn't enough, they tried to erase her name from the assets she built with her late husband, from her home, from her own story. Then came Arthur's turn. His attorney stood, all silk and apologies. While we acknowledge the events captured on video are regrettable, we maintain that Mr. Drayton acted in what he believed were the best interests of his mother. The judge didn't blink. Mr. Drayton, did you obtain informed, documented consent from your mother when you had her sign the durable power of attorney? Arthur cleared his throat. She said she trusted me. That wasn't the question. She signed it, I assumed. Mr. Drayton, the judge interrupted. Did you or did you not explain the full extent of that document to your mother before she signed it? A pause. Too long. No, he finally said. The judge looked down, made a note, then returned his gaze to Arthur. Thank you for your honesty. The ruling came quickly. Gloria Fielden remains legally and medically independent. The petition for guardianship is denied. Vera didn't move. Her jaw clenched, but she stared straight ahead. And based on submitted evidence, this court is opening a formal investigation into potential elder exploitation and financial coercion. Relevant agencies will be notified. Gasps echoed around the room. I took a breath, but I wasn't finished. Devlin turned to me, nodded once. I stood. Your Honor, I said, my voice clear, steady. I'd like to file a separate civil complaint against Arthur Drayton for emotional damages, elder manipulation, and attempted asset theft. The judge glanced over the papers Devlin submitted. Duly noted. I looked across the room at Arthur, whose face was now a shade paler than I'd ever seen it. This isn't just about legal rights, I said, or property. This is about a woman who raised us, who sacrificed more than we ever knew, who kept this family from falling apart even when we didn't deserve her. My voice didn't waver, and she was nearly erased by her own blood. The room was quiet. Even the reporters didn't type. Gloria reached for my hand. I squeezed it, steady and firm. This wasn't revenge. This was restoration. This was justice. By the time spring touched down in Denver, it had been 6 weeks since the verdict. Court transcripts had been finalized, media coverage faded to a few local op-eds, and for the first time in a long while, the house felt like it could breathe again. The sharp edges of what we'd endured hadn't disappeared, but they had dulled just enough to let in something softer, something close to peace. Gloria moved slower now, but she was steadier. Every morning, we took walks through the small garden I'd built behind my home years ago, more decorative than functional, but the lavender and rosemary had survived enough winters to be called resilient. We're okay now, she whispered one morning as we made our way along the path, her arm looped through mine. I didn't answer. I just let her say it, let her believe it. The truth was, the wounds were still fresh under the surface. But they were healing. Arthur and Vera hadn't taken long to unravel after the hearing. The media didn't swarm them, but small towns have long memories and louder whispers. Arthur's firm released a statement about internal restructuring, which was code for disbarment proceedings. He didn't bother fighting it. Vera's name quietly disappeared from her PR agency's website. Within a week, they issued a press release praising ethical responsibility in family narratives, a jab so sharp it made me laugh out loud. They left Bozeman less than a month after the ruling. According to a mutual acquaintance, they relocated somewhere in the Midwest. No farewell party, no neighbors stopping by with casseroles, Just packed boxes, a moving van, and a silence that didn't go unnoticed. At the grocery store where Mom used to shop, people no longer asked about the nice son who visited every Sunday. Now they whispered, "Can you believe what they did to their own mother?" The justice system did its job, but the town's quiet judgment, that was something else entirely. And perhaps even more lasting. When the days got longer and the frost finally let go of the roads, I took Gloria to Vermont. I drove us myself, 12 hours split over 2 days, with long breaks for coffee, gas, and nostalgia. The cabin sat nestled on the edge of a clearing, flanked by tall trees that still carried the ghost of winter. It was just as the paperwork described, untouched. The windows dusty, the porch sagging slightly, but everything else was just as I remembered from photos. She stepped out of the car and took in the view. Her eyes welled up, not from pain this time, but from memory. "He built this with his own hands," she said. "Your father always believed in peace." We stayed for a week. There wasn't much to do. That was the point. We cleaned, swept, aired out the rooms, cooked simple meals, walked the perimeter of the property with flashlights after dinner like we used to when I was a child visiting relatives upstate. At night, she sat in the rocking chair near the fireplace while I worked quietly at the kitchen table, planning something new. By the time we drove back to Colorado, I had formed the legal foundation of what would become the Fielden Foundation. Using part of the Vermont property, we would support causes often overlooked: elder advocacy, mental health support, caregiver protections. The irony wasn't lost on me. My family had tried to silence a woman, and now her name would fund the voices of hundreds. The plaque outside the Vermont cabin was installed 2 weeks later. I had it shipped up with care, and a local craftsman mounted it onto a stone slab near the walkway. It read, "For the woman they tried to silence, she still speaks through us." Back in Denver, we found rhythm in the small things. One Saturday evening, I cooked Mom's favorite dish, braised short ribs over mashed potatoes with roasted carrots from the farmer's market. The smell of the garlic and wine reduction drifted through the house like a warm blanket. We ate at the kitchen table with soft music playing in the background. No politics, no news, just food and familiar quiet. She took a bite, paused, then smiled. "They almost took everything," she said, "but they never took you." I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I met her eyes. "They couldn't. I'm yours." That night, as I loaded the dishwasher, I thought back to the day I canceled that deal. $10 million. A company that would have changed my resume forever. A future built on years of sweat, strategy, and ambition. But it hadn't been the wrong choice, because it gave me something bigger. I saved my mother's name, and mine too. When a name gets dragged through the mud, it doesn't just dirty letters on paper. It taints everything that person ever did, ever built. It turns memories into doubts, dignity into fiction. But now, every time someone walked past that plaque in Vermont, every time someone received help from the foundation, her name would echo. Not in courtrooms, not in headlines, but in moments of safety, dignity, care. Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just sits quietly beside you at the dinner table, holding your hand. Sometimes the loudest battles are fought in silence, behind closed doors, between people who share your last name. This story wasn't just about money. It was about memory, dignity, and the quiet strength it takes to stand up when even your own family turns away. So here's a question for you. What would you do if someone tried to erase the person who raised you? If this story moved you or reminded you of something you've lived through, share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, real-life family stories that need to be heard.